Hi, I'm Dr. Robert Silverman, and I'm going to discuss intermittent fasting for brain health. I'm really excited to share some interesting, applicable insights for everybody who's listening to this webinar. I'm going to have a vast overview in the first slide, so we lay the groundwork for the next 50 to 55 minutes of information. Intermittent fasting is one of the most exciting recent trends in health, especially brain health. When you follow this time-restrictive eating pattern, you eat only during a window of 6 to 10 hours between breakfast and your evening meal. During this time, you eat your usual amount of food. Intermittent fasting doesn't mean cutting calories. But when your eating window closes, you don't eat again until it opens the next morning. You fast for at least 14 hours and preferably up to 18 hours. A long overnight fast may seem strange, but in fact, that's the eating pattern humans have followed up until recently. Only in modern times has food been so abundant and easily accessible that we can eat lots of it around the clock, including extensive snacking in the evening. During our waking hours, most of us rarely go more than a few hours without eating. Returning to a more natural eating pattern through intermittent fasting can have a profound effect on your health. You give your digestive tract a break by not constantly piling food into it. And when you fast for at least 14 hours, you force your body to use up all the blood sugar in your circulation. In fact, to fuel your metabolism near the end of the fasting period, your body will probably need to dip into its reserves of stored glucose or glycogen and fat. At that point, you're in a state of mild ketosis without being on the ketogenic diet. You are now fueling yourself with ketone bodies, including one called beta-hydroxybutyrate. Burning beta-hydroxybutyrate promotes division and multiplication of the epithelial cells that lie the inside of your blood vessels and help keep your vascular system flexible. Healthy blood vessels keep your brain healthy, helping support vascularization and neurological health. Overall, intermittent fasting can support blood sugar levels within normal ranges by promoting a healthy insulin response. Keeping your blood sugar at healthy levels is extremely important for keeping your brain health as you age. A lack of healthy diet and exercise habits will rapidly age your brain through inflammation and oxidative stress. Keeping your blood sugar at normal levels will help you maintain proper cognitive health as you age. Intermittent fasting also brings down your overall level of inflammation. More and more, we realize the central role of inflammation in neurological health in aging populations. Keeping inflammation levels low as possible is a powerful strategy for preserving your brain health. The idea of fertilizing your brain, even more valuable for your brain health, is the way intermittent fasting increases levels of a critical brain protein called brain-derived neurotrophic factors. It is often called the fertilizer for the brain. BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factors, play a critical role in learning and memory by making communication between neurons in the brain more efficient. BDNF stimulates the growth of new neurons and makes neurons more resistant to the damaging effects of stress. When you have plenty of BDNF supporting your brain cells, your neurons fire together, and neurons that fire together will ultimately wire together. Secure, connected neurons as you age keep your memory intact and maintain your executive function and self-regulation skills. You can remember, plan, focus, and handle multiple tasks simultaneously. Interestingly, pre- and probiotic supplements also stimulate BDNF. This is an excellent example of how the gut influences the brain along the brain-gut axis. Here's how it works. Pre- and probiotic supplements increase the number of good bacteria in the gut. When you have more good bacteria, they produce more short-chain fatty acids, especially the gold medal winner, butyrate, as a byproduct of their metabolism. The abundant butyrate in the gut stimulates the complex process that makes you secrete more BDNF in your brain. Intermittent fasting can also stimulate autophagy, the body's natural cleanup process to remove and recycle damaged molecules, dysfunctional mitochondria, and worn-out cells. In the brain, the process helps remove the damaged proteins that form tau tangles. The fasting part of intermittent eating pattern puts your brain in an altered metabolic state that optimizes energy usage, builds connections amongst neurons, which we call plasticity, and improves resilience. More and more research is showing that intermittent fasting can improve cognition and slow age-related cognitive decline. Intermittent fasting can do a lot for your brain health, but it's just one piece of a bigger picture. Plenty of exercise and brain-healthy diet is just important. And I will go through a whole bunch of implementable factoids in the succeeding slides. Dr. Vlada Longo of the Longevity Diet said, "Awaken the body's dormant ability to heal, protect, regenerate, and rejuvenate itself." He was speaking about fasting. What's the problem? Well, the problem is the American diet and the American population is not healthy. The first issue is Americans consume too much sugar. The average American consumes 160 pounds of sugar per year. When mice were offered sugar, 94% of mice took sugar over cocaine. Sugar is extremely damaging to most people's overall health. Sugar also is the most used drug in America, or used over-counter drug in America today. We all would benefit from decreasing the amount of sugar we consume. Sugar comes in multiple forms. Its most common form is something called high fructose corn syrup, which is about 15% of Americans' caloric intake daily. Wheat consumption. Wheat has specific proteins of gluten. Gluten means glue. It sticks to your intestinal tract. It is very damaging to overall health, especially your gut microflora and your gut condition, more so than just the microflora. Also the gut's villi. So wheat is extremely damaging. Wheat comes with a specific chemical called glyphosate, which is in Roundup. The World Health Organization has spoken about glyphosate. Glyphosate is a cancer-causing chemical, and more so than that, glyphosate also damages the villi and typically the pristine condition that the gut needs to be in to function optimally. Caloric sweeteners equal saccharin and the like. They're very damaging to people's overall health. They increase the incidence of stroke and dementia by 2 to 3 times. They damage the gut's microflora. They damage not only the gut's microflora, they pass the blood-brain barrier, and they can cause neurodegenerative disease in the brain. We need to decrease the consumption to virtually zero of these type of artificial caloric sweeteners. There's a rise in diabetes. Dr. Mark Hyman spoke about the increase of obesity and diabetes 2012, and he actually coined the term diabetes because of this parallel increase between diabetes and obesity called diabetes, really speaking to the idea that the American population is too heavy and the American population's blood sugar is too high. Most Americans have back pain. 8 out of 10 Americans at some point will have back pain, joint back pain, osteoarthritis, all very common things that you'll see in the American population. And more so than that, very common things that can be attributed to poor dietary intake. NSAIDs and medications. Non-steroid anti-inflammatories do decrease pain, but they impair healing. Nutraceuticals decrease pain, but promote healing. Which do you prefer? So clearly NSAIDs, which damage the gut, not only do they damage the gut, they damage the tight junctions and they cause an excessive amount of release of zonulin, are something that most people should avoid in any kind of volume. Medications like opioids, also very deleterious to Americans' overall health. We live in a toxic world. We're full of toxins. And of course, with the health pandemic and all the things going on, we have this increased stress. These toxins and stress also can damage the gut microflora. Whatever you do to your gut, you do to your brain. And last but not least, we have an increased incidence of neurodegenerative disease. The idea of neurodegenerative disease speaks to most Americans by 2050, or should I say about half of Americans by 2050 will have some symptomology of neurodegenerative disease. We eat too many added sugars. 61% of infants eat too many added sugars. 98% of toddlers do exceed their sugar intake. Consumed added sugars are a part of the average American diet, and you'll find most added sugars found in things like flavored yogurts and fruit drinks. As I said before, the average American eats 17 teaspoons added sugar a day. That's not counting sugar that occurs naturally in foods like fruit or dairy products. That's truly double the recommended limit, 9 teaspoons for men daily. Triple the recommended limit for women, 6 teaspoons daily. And when you look at children who should be limited to 3 teaspoons, it's a head-shaking moment. High sugar doubles the risk for heart attack even for those that are not overweight. And lastly, added sugar increases the risk for type 2 diabetes, cancer, stroke, and Alzheimer's. Piggybacking on the previous slide on the idea of a sugar belly. Too much sugar can actually damage the liver. Not just damage the gut, but also damage the liver. This arises when the liver repeatedly detects more fructose than the body can use. Remember, fructose is what we call a sneaky carb. It hits multiple organs before it goes to the bloodstream. So the best way to deal with it is the liver breaks down extra fructose and changes it to fat gobulates. They're exported into the bloodstream and deposited around your internal organs and midsection. Sugar bust. 30% of the heightened chance of developing cancer among those who regularly consume large quantities of sugary drinks. 37% specific to breast cancer risk. BMJ, July 2019. The authors in the study hypothesized that sugar was the main factor. Chemicals can come in caramel coloring, and pesticides in fruit juices may also be the culprits for the aforementioned conditions. Cardiovascular disease mortality. 31% higher among those who consume 2 or more sugary drinks daily versus those who don't. There was 120,000 participants in the study over a 3-decade period. Eye-catching stat. Globally, 1 in 5 deaths are associated with a poor diet. Many people would benefit from rebalancing diets to eat optimal amount of various foods and nutrients. As we all know, as depicted in The Lancet, April 3, 2019, poor diet contributes to a range of chronic diseases. In my practice, the first thing I start with is changing people's dietary approaches to life. Fasting. It's actually an integral part of a healthy human diet. We recently lost this idea. If you go way back when, due to food scarcity, fasting was part of the human diet for 99% of our evolution on Earth. Actually, fasting is sustained by all 4 of the major religious factions, if you will. Unfortunately, fasting was replaced in the last 50 years by a pattern of uninterrupted daily food intake. We as Americans are able to eat food ad nauseum. We have access to food. We've been told to graze versus eat in a period of time. Obviously, when you look at the literature, fasting makes a lot of sense for health outcomes. Fasting was the #1 diet plan in 2018. There was a new poll in 2019 where 38% said yes to following a specific eating pattern in the past year. Believe it or not, in 2019, clean eating was #1, intermittent fasting was 2, low carb increased from last year, keto rose, and paleo and the Whole30 dropped. Plant-based and flexitarian were added, and what you're seeing in 2020, once again, intermittent fasting is at the top of everybody's consciousness. A lovely essay in the Wall Street Journal had a title that said, "The fasting cure is no fad," because they looked at the new research which showed tremendous profound benefits for weight loss, longevity, and fighting disease. And they truly define fasting as eating only during limited hours. Fasting originated in ancient evolution and healing traditions across the millennia. It has been shown to support overall metabolic health and improve metabolic health. It supports cellular cleanup that leads to cellular regeneration and an increase in circulating stem cells. And lastly, it impacts markers associated with an increase in human longevity and human health span. There are several different types of fasting. The first one that I'd like to refer to is time-restricted eating or time-restricted feeding, TRE, TRF. Time-restricted eating refers to humans. Time-restricted feeding refers to mice. Time-restricted eating is a daily pattern of eating during a window of anywhere between 6 to 12 hours. Intermittent fasting technically means 1 to 3 days of fasting, usually non-consecutive, per week. So even though we're calling it intermittent fasting, and even though intermittent fasting is used in the vernacular, if you're fasting and eating in the same day, it's truly called time-restricted eating. And finally, prolonged fasting. That's 4 or more days of consecutive fasting, which can refer to a water-only fast, which has some tremendous health benefits, but I'm not a big proponent of it because of a lot of loss of muscle mass, and of course, Vlada Longer's fast mimicking diet. Fasting ramps up human metabolism, studied by the GEO Cell Unit and Crito University researchers. Fasting, which puts the body in a starvation mode, leads to fuel substitution, antioxidation, increased mitochondrial activation, and altered signal transduction. The evolution of fasting. When food is scarce, the body acts to conserve energy by diminishing cellular growth patterns by regulating IGF-1, mTOR, and pKa. These are key nutrient-sensing pathways, which ultimately result in 1. Increased cellular maintenance and protection. 2. Increased activation of stress resistance pathways. 3. Removal and replacement of damaged dysfunctional cells. 4. Reduction of inflammation. The takeaway here is very simple. Fasting challenges the body, which engages the stress response pathways to increase the chance of survival. Intermittent fasting and diabetes. Intermittent fasting is known to improve sensitivity to blood glucose, lower insulin, protect against fatty liver, and lower pancreatic fat. The mechanism learned through this process is very simple. Increased secretion of insulin causes the Langerhans islets of diabetes-prone animals to deplete more quickly and ultimately cease functioning completely. Fat accumulation in the pancreas could contribute to the development of type 2 diabetes. In a landmark study in the New England Journal of Medicine in December 26, 2019, they studied intermittent fasting. And here were the takeaways. Ketogenesis occurred during intermittent fasting. Intermittent fasting decreased free radical production. There was weight loss. The cellular responses were as follows. Increased glucose regulation, increased stress resistance, and intermittent fasting suppressed inflammation. In addition to all of that, ketone bodies, because of the ketogenesis, were made. Ketone bodies are great because they're fuel during fasting, and they're potent signaling molecules with major effects on cell organ functions. Following up with the previous slide on intermittent fasting, here we had the clinical applications. They were great for obesity and type 2 diabetes. Cardiovascular disease indicators were improved. They were blood pressure, resting heart rate, levels of HDL, LDL, cholesterol, triglycerides, glucose, insulin resistance. Intermittent fasting decreased markers of systemic inflammation, oxidative stress, which were all related to atherosclerosis. It also improved heart rate variability, improving your parasympathetic tone, great for neurodegenerative disorders, and also arthritis, surgical and ischemic tissue injury. all resulting in accumulating evidence that eating in a 6-hour period and fasting for 18 hours can trigger a metabolic switch from glucose-based to ketone-based energy. To go into a little bit more depth in the New England Journal of Medicine article, cellular responses to energy restriction that integrate cycles of feeding and fasting with metabolism. Total energy intake, diet composition, and the length of fasting between meals contribute to oscillations in the ratio of the levels of bioenergetic sensors, NAD to NADH, ATP to AMP, and acetyl-CoA to CoA. These intermediate energy characters activate downstream proteins that regulate cell function and stress resistance, including transcription factors such as FOXOS and PGC1 alpha, and nuclear factor, or if you will, NRF2 kinases such as AMPK and citrulline. Intermittent fasting triggers neuroendocrine responses and adaptations characterized by low levels of amino acids, glucose, and insulin. Downregulation of IGF-1 signaling pathway and the reduction of circulating amino acids repress the activity of mTOR pathway, resulting in the inhibition of protein synthesis and stimulation of autophagy. During the fasting, the ratio of AMP to ATP is increased and AMPK is activated, triggering repair and inhibition of anabolic processes. ACOA and NAD serve as cofactors for epigenetic modifiers such as SERTs. The SERTs actually deacetate FOXOS and PGC1 alpha, resulting in the expression of genes involved in stress resistance and mitochondrial biogenesis. Collectively, the organism responds to intermittent fasting by mimicking anabolic processes, favoring and repair systems, enhancing stress resistance, recycling damaged molecules, stimulating mitochondrial biogenesis, and promoting cell survival, all of which support improvements in health and disease resistance. Now let's talk about the metabolic adaptations to intermittent fasting. Energy restriction for 10 to 14 hours or more results in depletion of liver glycogen stores and hydrolysis of triglycerides to free fatty acids and adipocytes. Free fatty acids released into the circulation are transported in hepatocytes, where they produce the ketone bodies beta-hydroxybutyrate and acetoacetate. Free fatty acids also activate transcription factors, PPAR, and activated transcription factor, ATF4, resulting in the production and release of fibroblastic growth factor 21, or FGF21, a protein with widespread effects on cells throughout the body and the brain. Beta-hydroxybutyrate and acetoacetate are actively transported into cells where they can be metabolized to acetyl-CoA, where it enters the TCA cycle and generates ATP. Beta-hydroxybutyrate has signaling functions including the activation of transcription factors such as cyclic AMP response element, binding protein, and nuclear factor or NF-kappa B, and the expression of brain-derived neurotrophic factors in neurons. Reduced levels of glucose and amino acids during fasting result in reduced activity of the mTOR pathway and upregulation of autophagy. Lastly, energy restriction stimulates mitochondrial biogenesis and mitochondria uncoupling. Cellular and molecular mechanisms underlying improved organ function and resistance to stress and disease with intermittent metabolic switching. Periods of dietary energy restriction sufficient to cause depletion of liver glycogen stores trigger a metabolic switch towards the use of fatty acids and ketones. Cells and organ systems adapt to this bioenergetic challenge by activating signaling pathways that bolster mitochondrial function, stress resistance, and antioxidant defenses while upregulating autophagy to remove damaged molecules and recycle their components. During the period of energy restriction, cells adapt to stress resistance mode through reduction in insulin signaling and overall protein synthesis. Exercise enhances these effects of fasting. On recovery from fasting, i.e. eating and sleeping, glucose levels increase, ketone levels plummet, and cells increase protein synthesis, undergoing growth and repair. Maintenance of an intermittent fasting regimen, particularly when combined with regular exercise, results in many long-term adaptations that improve mental and physical performance and increase disease resistance. Continuing with the concept of intermittent fasting, the majority of benefits seem to occur during digestive process in the hours between meals. 5 to 15% of the body's energy is dedicated to digestion. Digestion improves through proper functioning of the migrating motor complex. Migrating motor complex is peristaltic wave contractions from the stomach to the small intestine to the large intestine, moving food bolus. Fasting gives a longer break from digestion. It leads to improved digestive health. Some key caveats: autophagy typically starts at hour 13 of a fast and shifts into high gear at about hour 15. Intermittent fasting allows for insulin to decrease, lowers insulin producing weight loss, improving body composition. Fasting boasts mitochondrial efficacy. Fasting state protects the length of telomeres, turns on the SIRT1 gene, and turns off the mTOR gene. Another type of fasting is alternate day fasting. In this study, there were 60 participants. They fasted every other day, and they believe that that could be the secret to their losing weight. They believe that it mimicked human caveman diets. So what they did was, very simply, they fasted for 36 hours, then ate anything they felt like eating for the next 12 hours. They reached an average caloric restriction of 35% by the alternate day fast, and they lost almost 8 pounds after 4 weeks. Continuing with that study, they furthered 30 participants were put on an alternate day fast for 6 months to assess the safety of the diet now over a long period of time. The results were very, very interesting in that immune function was stable, there was a reduction in belly fat, and there are lower levels of a marker that showed increased longevity in the participants. In Obesity 2019, a new pilot study was found. Those practicing time-restrictive eating within a 6-hour period and fasting for 18 hours improved fat burning, lowered levels of hungry hormone ghrelin compared to those who ate the exact same meals within a 12-hour period. So as we all know, 16 to 18-hour fasts are the best choice during the day. In this study in Cell Metabolism of 2019, participants were restricted to eating 10 hours or less. Over a period of 12 weeks, they lost weight, they reduced their abdominal fat, they lowered blood pressure, they lowered cholesterol, they lowered their blood sugar, and they lowered their insulin levels. Interesting, metabolism is closely linked with circadian rhythms. This was a tremendously cost-effective method of reducing metabolic syndrome. In Cell Metabolism, July 15, 2020, there was an 8-week trial performed. 58 men and women were assigned to 3 different groups. Group 1 did time-restrictive eating between 3 and 7 p.m. Group 2, time-restrictive eating between 1 and 7 p.m. They ate whatever they wanted. The control group ate without restrictions. Groups 1 and 2 from the time-restrictive eating consumed 550 calories a day. They lost 3% body weight. Compared with control groups, both groups had significant decreased fat mass, reduction in oxidative stress, decrease in fasting insulin, and decrease in insulin resistance. Here, this slide shows you the 4 to 6 hour time restrictive eating in adults with obesity and all the things that occurred, which I just went through in detail in the previous slide. Here are some of the benefits of time-restrictive eating. We have increased or induction of autophagy. Improved circadian rhythm, which is a critical element. When you travel, you throw off your circadian rhythm. Promotes longevity, you live longer. Promoting weight loss. Increasing insulin sensitivity. Improving brain cognition, and for me, maybe the most important thing, improving gut health. I've spoken about autophagy several times now. Let's make a clear definition. It truly means self-devouring. The process of autophagy won a 2016 Nobel Prize. It refers to the idea that cells deconstruct old, damaged components in order to release energy and build new molecules. Autophagy helps to counteract aging of cells and builds immunity. It's really immunorejuvenation of cells. Fasting, like a time-restrictive eating, stimulates autophagy. Eating, or especially eating carbohydrates, which release insulin, disrupts the process of autophagy. Cellular cleanup crew. Autophagy, or if you will, fasting caloric restriction can both ramp up autophagy, a kind of cellular housekeeping. When cells are in famine mode and they don't have to break down food, they pause the usual tasks and stop dividing. Instead, they work on repairing and recycling damaged components and cleaning out dead or harmful cell matter. So normally, cells grow and divide and engages in all usual cellular function. That usually occurs during feeding. In fasting, autophagy growth ceases. The cell instead focuses on internal cleaning, getting rid of its cellular junk. This side really depicts fasting, its positive effect on stimulating AMPK and autophagy. Please make note, you're getting improved muscle functioning with age because of the mitophagy, and you're really seeing mitophagy and autophagy occurring because of fasting. Mitophagy, the breakdown of mitochondria and the regrowth thereof. Fasting summary. The body identifies the presence of food through nutrient-sensing pathways. These pathways are IGF-1, mTOR, and pKa are three key nutrient-sensing pathways. The takeaway on nutrient-sensing pathways are as follows. They're typically pro-growth, pro-aging, lead to many common health problems, including heart disease and cancer. So fasting has shown to downregulate these nutrient-sensing pathways. Let's look at some fasting research. Fasting, by reducing those aforementioned pathways, promotes resilience and protection from aging and disease. Unfortunately, the elevation of IGF-1 is a pro-growth hormone that mediates the effect of growth hormone, stimulates cell growth and proliferation of pathways. Promotes high levels of IGF-1 are associated with cancer. The reduction in IGF-1 levels result in the following: lower incidence of cancer, improved stress resistance, reduced mTOR pathway signaling, reduced insulin levels with increased insulin sensitivity, which is the true opposite of the metabolic syndrome. When we look at the influence of meal frequency and timing in humans, you're looking at the role of fasting. If you look at the gentleman on the right, the more corpulent gentleman, you'll see that he's eating 6 meals a day. He's skipping breakfast. Breakfast is the most important meal. I'm a big proponent of eating breakfast and missing a late dinner. This gentleman skipped breakfast, ate late at night, had a high-fat, high-sugar diet, and he had reduced fasting period. Therefore, he had a decrease in insulin sensitivity. Cholesterol was a problem, increased hunger, increased inflammation, had circadian rhythm disruption, and microbiota negative changes. Whereas the thin Adonis-looking guy had 2 to 3 meals daily, ate breakfast, ended his meals by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, avoided a late night snack, increased his protein content, and had a fasting period of 12 to 16 hours daily. He benefited with the increase of the AMPK pathway, increased insulin sensitivity, decrease in total cholesterol, hunger, and inflammation, and was able to optimize autophagy and improved his circadian rhythm. This colored slide really depicts the influence of meal frequency and the timing. If you see all the red, all the hazardous stuff, all the deleterious stuff to health came with the skipping of breakfast. Lunch, if you will, was a push, but eating an early dinner, look at all the positive effects. LDL cholesterol decrease, blood pressure decrease, body weight decrease, fat mass decrease, lower incidence of CHD, and diabetes mellitus. In this Mount Sinai study in Cell, In 2019, fasting was shown to reduce inflammation and improve chronic inflammatory diseases. What they found out was it reduced chronic inflammation, but didn't adversely affect acute inflammation. It did so by reducing the release of the monocytes, so the cells go into a sleep mode and are less inflammatory than those found when fed. So for me, one of my takeaways is simply, during fasting, our body gets busy with repair and defense mechanisms. If we're eating for long periods of time during the day, we don't get the benefit of this cellular housekeeping. Does eating less make you live longer and better? It's an interesting update on caloric restriction. Caloric restriction impacts various cellular pathways, induces responses of the whole organism, leading to a more efficient metabolism, a higher protection against cellular damage, and the activation of remodeling mechanisms, whereas less efficient metabolism and synthetic pathways are blocked. Caloric restriction inhibits processes involved in cell proliferation and glycolysis by blocking IGF-1 receptor-dependent pathways and mTOR-dependent activities. Caloric restriction exerts anti-inflammatory effects by inhibiting NF-kappa B. It also decreases the production of ROS and increases mitochondrial biogenesis through different pathways. The caloric restriction-induced activation of FOXOS implies the resumption of autophagy and mitophagy and the risen expression of antioxidants. It also invokes activation of NF-kappa B, or if you will, NRF2, that increases the expression of mitochondria and cell antioxidant enzymes. Any of these processes participate in caloric restriction-related increase in improving health span and longevity. Intermittent fasting and energy-restricted diets effect on lipid profile. The conclusion were very simply, it was quite effective in improving circulating total cholesterol, LDL-C, and triglyceride concentrations. It had no meaningful effect on HDL-C levels. The results suggested dietary practices are a means of enhancing lipid profile in humans. Many people ask me who shouldn't fast. Here's a list. Pregnant and breastfeeding women, children, anyone with a history of an eating disorder, underweight patients using 20 BMI as an example, those suffering from heart problems or high blood pressure, and last, adrenal issues and blood sugar imbalances. Here's one of my favorite studies, fasting's use as a therapy in neurological disease. Fasting increases BDNF, beta-hydroxybutyrate, AMPK, adenopectin, and ghrelin. It also was shown to decrease glucose, insulin, mTOR, leptin, interleukin-6, and TNF-alpha. This all leads to the optimization of neuronal bioenergetics, optimized neuroplasticity and neurogenesis, and optimized neuron resilience. Fasting is a critical element in overall therapy for neurological disease, and it works synergistically with any other kind of treatment you may consider. Brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF. You want to produce this because it supports the branching network of neurons. It reduces neurodegenerative risk. It makes neuronal synapses and communication more efficient. I like to refer to it as the fertilizer or the miracle grow for the brain. My statement that I like to share with many of my patients and colleagues alike is that a BDNF allows brain cells to fire together, therefore they can wire together. Remember, it's a protein, and it blocks injury-related apoptosis and enhances long-term potentiation in the hippocampus. What enhances BDNF? Number one thing that I've seen, exercise. Turmeric curcumin, whole coffee extract, intermittent fasting, fish oils, most predominantly DHA, alpha-lipoic acid, probiotics, ketone bodies, and prebiotics. Let's all understand that this picture is something that we don't want to happen. We clearly don't want our brain to be out of order. So the succeeding slides will show you a multitude of ways to avoid this particular incident. Let's talk about Alzheimer's, sixth leading cause of death in the U.S., seventh in the world. Between 2000 and 2015, heart attack deaths decreased 11%. Alzheimer's deaths increased by 123. 1 in 3 seniors die from Alzheimer's dementia, which kills more people than breast and prostate cancer combined. There's a tremendous financial cost attributed to Alzheimer's. Ultimately, someone in the U.S. develops the disease every 65 seconds. 60 to 70% of Alzheimer's sufferers are women. Women with mild cognitive impairment are found to decline faster than men with a similar diagnosis. Similar levels of biomarkers may have different prognostic values for men and women. Some of the reasons that women are more susceptible to Alzheimer's are the loss of ovaries and the number of pregnancies. There's also mounting evidence indicating microglial cells are different in women than men. Some basic lab tests for overall brain health. Fasting blood glucose, hemoglobin A1C, fasting insulin, homocysteine, C-reactive protein, and vitamin D levels. An excellent blood test for Alzheimer's would be NFL, or neurofilament light chain. This normally resides inside brain cells. When damaged, the dying cells leak it into the cerebrospinal fluid. The protein then travels into the bloodstream. NFL levels can predict symptoms 16 years ahead of the actual physical Alzheimer's disease. I'm a big proponent of Dr. Dale Bredesen. This is a component of his RECODE protocol. His RECODE stands for the reversal of cognitive decline. Let's talk about Part 1, anti-Alzheimer's diet, KetoFlex 12-3. Part 1, ketosis. That's a process where the liver produces ketone bodies. We all know about beta-hydroxybutyrate. It's known to increase BDNF production. You get a lot of BDNF from beta-hydroxybutyrate because you add MCT oil, coconut, olive oil, avocado, and nuts to your diet. Please have all your patients test for the APOE4 allele. That will increase your incidence of Alzheimer's if you find that to be present in the patient. And lastly, as metabolism goes, so does cognition. Piggybacking on the anti-Alzheimer's diet. Here we're seeing the idea, and I like it very much, of plant-based diet emphasizing vegetables, the non-starchy type of vegetables. Please include foods that are cooked, uncooked, colorful vegetables, fish, poultry, and meats, small amounts, but we want wild fish with grass-fed meats. Part 3, 12-3, refers to the fasting time. Bredesen had spoke about a minimum of a 12-hour fast. If you had the APOE4 genotype, you want a 14 to 16-hour fast. I think it's pretty set now that we want 14 to 16 hours. One of the key takeaways is have a 3-hour minimum time between the end of the dinner and the bedtime. And I think that's where you see the idea of the KetoFlex, ketogenic diet that's flexible, that's 12-3, which is shown really to help prevent leaky gut and optimize the microbiome. Getting a little more involved with the diet, choose foods from the glycemic index that's under 35. Avoid fruit juices in favor of whole fruits. Avoid what we refer to as the Bermuda Triangle. No simple carbs, not that many saturated fats, and try and watch your lack of fiber. Avoid gluten and dairy. Reduce your toxic load. Always include good fats. Avoid processed food, and eat smashed fish, salmon, mackerel, anchovies, sardines, and herring. Here are some lifestyle changes that are strongly recommended to help avoid and work within the Alzheimer's paradigm. Exercise, sleep, reduce stress, brain training, resolve inflammation, inhibit new inflammation, remove all inflammatory sources, heal the gut with my 7R program. Reset, remove, replace, regenerate, reinoculate, reintroduce, and retain. People don't realize that you can detox for cognitive decline. A lot of this cognitive decline comes through the detoxification program. Sleep is a critical element in that it's able to detox your brain because your brain goes to 40% or squeezes at night to 40% of its natural size, squeezing all the toxins out. So a critical element if in that gut to brain axis, the brain is brain number one, obviously. The gut is brain number two. Brain number three is your liver. The RECODE protocol. Avoid insulin resistance, inflammations, and infections. Look at hormone, nutrient, trophic factor optimization. Decrease the amount of toxins, whether they're chemical, biological, or physical, and always look for restoration and protection of lost or dysfunctional brain synapses. Now let's look at some nutritional strategies for blood sugar control to help brain health. Sugar is the sociopath of foods. It acts sweet, but it's really poison. What you don't know about sugar: 50 minutes of running or 5 miles of walking can burn 250 calories and 16 tablespoons of sugar. A 20-year study of 40,000 men revealed that the consumption of one sugar beverage per day increased heart attack by 20%. Just remember, a sugar-free food must contain less than a half a gram of sugar per serving. Diabetes risk doubles with more than 2 soft drinks daily. This is true for regular and/or diet soda. 2 times more likely for something called LADA, which is latent autoimmune diabetes of adults. It's a subtype of type 1 diabetes. It develops later in adulthood. It's actually called diabetes 1.5 because it shares the characteristics of 1 and 2. Autoimmune, like type 1 diabetes, and incorporates insulin resistance, like type 2 diabetes. Sugar, fat, and cardiovascular disease. Large meta-analysis show that fat has no direct link with cardiovascular disease unless it's trans fats. However, sugar has the highest incidence of increasing cardiovascular disease. So without question, sugar is also a independent risk factor for weight gain. Here was one of my TV appearances where we talked about the new dietary guidelines, and here they are. Consumers should drastically cut back on sugar. They actually should limit the consumption to 10% of your daily calories. There were also limits on cholesterol were removed because we know that cholesterol is a friend and not a foe. The World Health Organization almost suggested removing all sugar from your diet, but with a lot of pressure, they just left that 10% number. And one more caveat: men and boys should consume less protein. No more sugar. Fructose alters hundreds of brain genes, which can lead to a wide range of diseases. Fructose altered 900 genes in the hypothalamus and the hippocampus. Many of these genes are affected by fructose. Interesting, fructose removes or adds biochemical groups to cytosine. This plays critical roles in turning genes on and off. So fructose, without question, is the sneaky carbohydrate and is very ruinous to overall health. Fructose-containing drinks can increase the risk of type 2 diabetes more than other foods that actually contain fructose. So it's worse to consume the beverage than actually like the fruit. High fructose corn syrup is getting to all our foods. As I said earlier, it's about 15% minimum of our average American's total consumption of calories. They changed in label, and now high fructose corn syrup can be labeled as fructose or fructose syrup, and most people still think fructose is healthy. We all have to be on the lookout for this labeling and really decrease our consumption of fructose. What happens in the gut after too much fructose? This is a graphic abstract that depicts the findings, which show that it's actually the small intestine that clears most dietary fructose, and this is enhanced by feeding. High fructose doses spill over to the liver and to the colonic microbiota for metabolism. Let me share a scenario with you. Healthy blood sugar range. Remaining blood sugar from a previous meal decreases. You then have a patient who eats a sugary meal. The sugar is rapidly absorbed into their bloodstream, causing a sugar spike. The pancreas responds within a 30 to 60 minute period. Pancreas pumps insulin into the blood in an attempt to bring the blood sugar back to proper range. Then, due to high amount of sugar, pancreas overestimates how much insulin to pump into the blood. The result is too much sugar is removed from the blood, causing a blood sugar crash. This is where many of the patients and the people we know live. Speaking to this particular slide, the bottom line is if you eat too much or eat too many sweets, your blood sugar will shoot up quickly and then drop down precipitously. On the way down, your adrenal glands make cortisol to keep your blood sugar stable. So it's very clear that glycemic dysregulation has an adverse effect on multiple systems in the body. 21st century health problems, carbohydrate intolerance and glucose toxicity. There's been an overconsumption of sugars and low quality carbohydrate consumption. This has all led to the development of glucose toxicity and chronic illness well before the rise in diabetes. Nearly 60% of the population is now predisposed to carbohydrate intolerance. Without a solution, this epidemic will continue to grow nationally. I'd like to go into some detail why the ketogenic diet is a positive diet for obesity and diabetes, hence also having a great impact on brain health. So let's explore the efficacy of the keto and its effect with patients, whether these patients are overweight or obese, with or without diabetes type 2. Remember the keto diet, the macronutrient level of 75 fat, 20% protein, 5% carbohydrate will reduce insulin levels, which will also redirect lipid metabolism, also enable ketone utilizations. As we said earlier, ketones are excellent energy sources, not just for the body, especially for the brain. A review of this recent study revealed 14 randomized controlled trials, 734 people overweight or obese, 444 diabetic patients, and 290 non-diabetic patients. The primary lab assessments were as follows: fasting glucose, hemoglobin A1C, fasting insulin, C-peptides, total cholesterol, triglycerides, LDL, HDLs, C-reactive protein, and serum creatinine. Also collected and considered were body weight, BMI, waist circumference, and blood pressure readings. Effects of ketogenic diet on glycemic control over a 3 to 12 month period. Positive results were more significant in patients with diabetes than with low fat. This was demonstrated by a significant decrease in hemoglobin A1C, HOMA, and for diabetic patients. Keto diets were then looked in a 4 to 12 month period. They demonstrated significant weight reductions in both diabetic and non-diabetic patients. The lipid profiles improved in the diabetic patients by increasing HDL and decreasing triglyceride levels. Ketogenic diet was shown to be an effective strategy for weight loss. Some of the problems it's very hard to transition to. Exogenous ketones are a very valuable adjunct, and here's the big takeaway. Intermittent fasting is extremely synergistic with the ketogenic diet. So let's share some of the benefits of fasting on the ketogenic diet. Number one, gets you into a state of ketosis quicker, enables you to drop weight fast, increases mental clarity, and will improve health by enhancing muscle growth, reduce inflammation, and improve insulin sensitivity. Fasting-induced release of beta-hydroxybutyrate actually delays vascular aging. So let's go through this dynamic. Fasting actually produces, as we know, beta-hydroxybutyrate, which promotes division and multiplication of cells that line the inside of blood vessels. Delayed vascular aging through endothelial cells. Beta-hydroxybutyrate prevented cellular aging. It also keeps the DNA of the endothelial cells young and undamaged. If the vascular system becomes younger, you're less likely to have cardiovascular disease and Alzheimer's disease because many of these diseases are age-related. Here's a study that speaks to the idea of the effects of daily fasting on shaping gut microbiota in mice. The conclusion was simply, intermittent fasting shapes gut microbiota in healthy mice in a daily fasting hour-dependent manner, and a magnitude effect of fasting, which was observed upon a 16-hour fasting duration. Intermittent fasting in the gut microbiota. Intermittent fasting promotes white adipose browning. White adipose tissue to brown adipose tissue transition, which is a truly beneficial reaction. It decreases obesity by changing the gut microbiota. It alters functions of the gut microbiota in a fasting group, inducing beige formation. And finally, gut microbiota fermentation products such as acetate and lactate increase during fasting. Intermittent fasting benefits for gut health. Gut health really matters. And the reason that it matters is because the gut and the brain are intertwined. It's a bidirectional communication. In our series of webinars, we've really detailed that and really shown that whatever you do to your gut, you do to your brain. Whatever you do to your brain, you do to your gut. Circadian rhythm, without question, plays a critical role in intermittent fasting's help or benefit for gut health. Intermittent fasting really works by giving your digestive system a break. Giving it a break allows the migrating motor complex to work efficiently. Without question, intermittent fasting is a great way to improve the gut-brain health or gut-brain connection. The bottom line is all my patients get a recommendation of a time-restrictive eating, intermittent fasting for not only gut health, but also brain health. So I've talked about the Super 7 action plan earlier. I'm going to detail it a little more. R number 1 is the reset. You're going to reset your diet, lifestyle, and mindset. So clearly within the resetting of the lifestyle and the diet, you're going to incorporate intermittent fasting for better gut and better gut to brain health. Then going to remove. Remove what? Unwanted pathogens. Remove the trigger. Then remove these pathogens, these bacteria, these viruses, these fungi that don't belong there. And you're going to do so with berberine, garlic, and other products of that note. You then want to replace. Replace what? Replace with needed digestive enzymes, stomach acid, and bile. 60 to 70% of Americans have a digestive issue. This is a great opportunity to replace all the needed digestive and stomach and pancreatic enzymes. Regenerate. Regenerate your damaged intestinal mucosa. Use specific nutrients that will create a microenvironment of anti-inflammatory and other nutrients that will help heal and seal the mucosal lining. Reinoculate with what? Good quality pre and probiotics. This is your time where you want to give that plethora of pre and probiotics to enable the gut to be populated with probiotics pro-life. Reintroduce. Now, whatever foods that you took out in the removal phase, those triggers, maybe those food sensitivities, here's a great opportunity to reintroduce certain foods that were taken away. This way, the patient doesn't feel like they've lost all their possibilities of what they would like to eat. And lastly, retain. Retain your health and your GI integrity. Retain your health and GI integrity by incorporating time-restrictive eating, intermittent fasting to enable you to optimize your brain health. So everybody, please keep an eye out early 2021. My ever-increasing, my ever-changing book called The Superhighway to Health, The 7 Steps to Optimizing the Gut-Brain Connection. I always like to hit the finish line with a quote. So Oliver Wendell Holmes said something once that really resonated with me. The mind once stretched by a new idea never returns to its original dimensions. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to anybody at Da Vinci, or please feel free to follow me at my different Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I'm all over the social media. I'd love to interact with you. There's my website. I hope you found this 60-minute webinar of value. Dr. Rob Silverman, always yours in health.